The morning light, filtered through the grimy upper panes of the colossal arched windows, cast long, distorted shadows across the polished, yet perpetually scuffed linoleum floor of the federal district courthouse's main lobby. A faint, almost imperceptible hum resonated through the cavernous space, a low thrumming sound originating from the building's antiquated ventilation system, mingling with the sharper, more immediate clatter of hurried footsteps and the distant, muffled ring of a telephone from some unseen administrative office. The air itself possessed a peculiar composite aroma. A sterile, metallic tang of disinfectant struggled valiantly against the persistent underlying scent of stale coffee, cheap printer ink, and the subtle human effluvium of countless anxious individuals who had traversed these very halls, each carrying their own burden of legal woes or civic duties. Directly ahead, the security checkpoint, a formidable gauntlet of brushed steel turnstiles, flickering X-ray monitors, and the ever-present anodyne glow of a walk-through metal detector served as the primary bottleneck, a necessary purgatory before one could access the hallowed, if somewhat dilapidated, inner sanctums of justice. Two uniformed security officers, their expressions etched with the weary resignation of those perpetually guarding an often unruly flock, scrutinized each passing face with practiced, dispassionate efficiency. A large laminated sign, its edges peeling, slightly, sternly advised all visitors to remove metallic objects, a directive frequently ignored, leading to the repetitive, grating beep of the detector and the subsequent exasperated sighs of the officers. Chief Wallace Thorne, a man whose very posture exuded an almost gravitational pull of self-importance, navigated this mundane obstacle course with the practiced ease of an apex predator moving through its familiar territory. His crisp, dark blue police uniform, meticulously pressed and adorned with an array of gleaming commendations and rank insignia, seemed to absorb the dim light, projecting an aura of impenetrable authority. The starched collar of his shirt bit sharply into the fleshy underside of his jaw, creating a slight, almost imperceptible bulge of muscle as he subtly rotated his head, his gaze sweeping across the waiting individuals with a proprietary disdain. His boots, polished to a mirror sheen, clicked with a purposeful, almost martial cadence against the linoleum, each step a deliberate punctuation mark in the otherwise hushed environment. A faint, almost imperceptible sheen of perspiration clung to his temples, betraying a recent exertion or perhaps a simmering internal agitation, though his outward composure remained rigidly unyielding. His broad shoulders, slightly hunched forward as if perpetually preparing to ram through an unseen obstacle, conveyed an impression of immense physical power, barely contained. His eyes, small and piercingly blue beneath heavy furrowed brows, darted from face to face, assessing, dismissing, and occasionally lingering with a flicker of suspicion. He had just emerged from a particularly frustrating meeting with the district attorney, a discussion that had left a bitter metallic taste in his mouth, further fueling his already robust sense of self-entitlement. He carried himself with the unmistakable air of a man accustomed to unquestioning deference, his every gesture, from the slight, dismissive wave of his hand to the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw, broadcasting his inherent superiority. He viewed the general public, particularly those who found themselves in the courthouse lobby, as a collection of minor inconveniences, potential threats, or, at best, malleable subjects for his unyielding authority. Suddenly, a subtle disruption rippled through the orderly queue. A young man, Elias Vance, stepped forward, his slight frame appearing almost ephemeral against the robust bulk of Chief Thorne, who was just passing the exit side of the security checkpoint. Elias possessed an understated presence, a quiet dignity that seemed almost anachronistic in the bustling, impersonal environment. His suit, while impeccably tailored, showed the subtle creases of a long journey, the dark fabric a stark contrast to the chief's pristine uniform. He carried a slim, well-worn leather satchel, clutched loosely in one hand, its contents unseen but hinting at a life of intellectual pursuits rather than physical confrontation. His skin, a rich, deep hue that absorbed the dim light rather than reflecting it, lent his features a certain gravitas, even in repose. His hair, meticulously cut and neatly faded at the sides, framed a face that seemed both youthful and remarkably composed, his eyes dark and intelligent, observing the scene with a quiet intensity that belied his apparent lack of power. As he approached the metal detector, he paused, a momentary hesitation before stepping through. The machine shrieked, a high-pitched, insistent wail that echoed sharply through the lobby, momentarily silencing the ambient chatter. One of the security officers, a burly man with a perpetually tired expression, sighed audibly, his shoulders slumping slightly. He instructed Elias, his voice devoid of inflection, to remove any metallic items. Elias, his movements deliberate and unhurried, began to empty his pockets. A set of keys, a slim wallet, a small elegant pen. He placed them carefully into the plastic tray. He stepped through again. The machine remained stubbornly silent. The officer nodded curtly, gesturing him forward. But as Elias reached for his belongings on the conveyor belt, a faint, almost imperceptible bulge beneath the lapel of his suit jacket caused the metal detector to emit a single, sharp beep. It was a softer, less urgent sound than before, but still enough to draw the attention of Chief Thorne, who had paused momentarily, his hand resting on the heavy brass door handle leading out of the building. Thorne's head snapped back, his eyes narrowing, instantly locking onto Elias. He perceived the minor security infraction not as an oversight, but as a deliberate act of defiance, a challenge to the established order he so meticulously upheld. His jaw tightened, a muscle clenching visibly beneath his tanned skin. He strode back towards the checkpoint, his polished boots clicking with renewed intensity, each step radiating an escalating impatience. He dismissed the security officers with a curt, dismissive wave of his hand, effectively seizing control of the situation. His voice, when he spoke, was a low growl, thick with barely concealed contempt. He informed Elias that he had failed to comply with the security protocols, his tone laced with an unmistakable accusation of intentional misconduct. He demanded to know what additional metallic objects Elias was concealing, his gaze raking over Elias's frame with an eye, almost predatory intensity, lingering on the subtle curve of his chest beneath the jacket. Elias, despite the sudden shift in atmosphere and the chief's imposing presence, remained remarkably calm. His expression did not waver. No flicker of fear or indignation crossed his features. He politely explained that he had emptied his pockets of all obvious items and that he was unaware of any remaining metallic objects on his person. He offered to be scanned manually, his voice even and measured, devoid of any challenge or subservience. His composure seemed to infuriate Chief Thorne even further, who interpreted Elias's tranquil demeanor as a form of insolence, a silent defiance. Thorne's nostrils flared almost imperceptibly as he took a deep, agitated breath. He leaned closer, his imposing frame towering over Elias, his voice dropping to a harsh, guttural whisper, though still audible enough to draw the attention of other waiting individuals, who instinctively recoiled, sensing the escalating tension. He declared that Elias was wasting valuable time, implying that Elias's presence was a mere inconvenience, a trivial disruption to the chief's important schedule. He then, with a swift, almost practiced motion, reached out and roughly patted down Elias's suit jacket, his large hand brushing against Elias's chest, feeling for the source of the anomaly. His fingers immediately encountered a hard, flat object nestled securely in an inner pocket. With a triumphant sneer, Thorne pulled it free, a small, exquisitely crafted silver badge polished to a brilliant gleam, bearing the seal of the United States. It was an identification badge, but not one he immediately recognized, its specific design subtly different from the usual federal law enforcement or judicial staff IDs he was accustomed to. He held it up, dangling it contemptuously between his thumb and forefinger, a mocking smile twisting his lips. He scoffed, his voice dripping with derision, asking Elias if he believed such a meager trinket would grant him special privileges or allow him to bypass established security procedures. He implied that Elias was attempting to impersonate an official, his tone loaded with suspicion and thinly veiled racial prejudice, suggesting that a man of Elias's appearance could not possibly hold a position of true authority. He announced loudly to the security officers and to anyone within earshot that Elias was being uncooperative and possibly attempting to gain Unauthorized access, deliberately mischaracterizing the situation to justify his own escalating aggression. Elias, still maintaining his remarkable composure, simply looked at the chief, his dark eyes unwavering, betraying no emotion. He stated calmly that the badge was his official identification and that he had presented it during previous security checks at other federal facilities without incident. He explained in a measured tone that he had a critical appointment scheduled for 9 o'clock, glancing subtly at a watch beneath his cuff, a small, understated timepiece that seemed almost out of place amidst the escalating drama. His words, rather than diffusing the situation, seemed to ignite Chief Thorne's already volatile temper. Thorne, shaking his head slowly, his lips curling into a condescending smirk, dismissed Elias's explanation as a pathetic fabrication. He declared, his voice rising in volume, that he had seen countless desperate individuals attempt similar charades to evade proper protocol, and that Elias's supposed critical appointment was of no consequence to him. He then, with a sudden, decisive movement, snatched Elias's satchel from his hand, tossing it unceremoniously onto the X-ray conveyor belt, instructing one of the security officers to put it through again, his actions a clear display of dominance and disrespect. "You are obstructing a federal building," Thorne pronounced, his voice now a booming declaration that silenced the last vestiges of ambient noise in the lobby. "And you are clearly attempting to circumvent security. I am placing you under arrest for disorderly conduct and failure to comply." He did not wait for a response. With a swift, almost brutal efficiency, he grabbed Elias's left wrist, twisting it sharply behind his back. The cold metal of the handcuffs snapped shut with a sharp, definitive click, the sound reverberating through the suddenly hushed lobby, a stark testament to the chief's unyielding power. Elias flinched, a fleeting, almost imperceptible contraction of his shoulders, but otherwise offered no resistance. His dark eyes, however, held a peculiar glint, a spark of something unreadable, a deep, unsettling calm that seemed entirely out of place for a man being unjustly cuffed by a powerful police chief in a public space. He did not protest, did not struggle, did not raise his voice. He merely stood there, his hands bound, his gaze fixed on Chief Thorne, a faint, almost imperceptible curve forming at the corner of his lips, a subtle, enigmatic smile that seemed to hint at a secret, a profound understanding of events that transcended the immediate, humiliating reality. His stillness, his quiet acceptance, was more unsettling than any outburst, leaving Chief Thorne with a fleeting, almost imperceptible sensation of unease, a sensation he quickly suppressed, attributing it to the satisfaction of a job well done, of order restored. The chief tightened his grip on Elias's arm, beginning to pull him towards a side door, presumably leading to a holding area within the precinct. The silver badge, the one Elias had presented, still lay forgotten on the security table, its polished surface reflecting the dim, indifferent light of the courthouse lobby, a silent, glittering harbinger of the profound reversal that was yet to unfold. Elias's eyes, as he was led away, passed over the badge once more, a brief, almost imperceptible acknowledgement, before settling on the chief's back, a gaze of quiet, almost preternatural patience. The air in the lobby seemed to thicken, charged with the unspoken tension of a moment pregnant with unrevealed consequence, a mere prelude to the inevitable, seismic shift in power. Elias, despite the handcuffs, despite the chief's triumphant display, seemed to carry an invisible weight of knowledge, an unshakable certainty that this humiliating public spectacle was but the first act in a drama only he fully comprehended. The chief, oblivious in his arrogance, pulled him forward, entirely unaware of the precipice upon which his career now teetered. Chief Wallace Thorne, his grip on Elias Vance's cuffed wrist firm and unyielding, tugs him towards a nondescript side door, its institutional beige paint chipped at the edges, leading away from the public spectacle of the main lobby. The metal of the handcuffs, cold and unyielding against Elias's skin, presses a stark reality into the moment. Yet Elias's composure remains an uncracked facade. Thorne feels a surge of righteous indignation, a familiar, almost comforting warmth spreading through his chest. He views Elias's quietude not as dignity, but as a cunning attempt to disarm him, a typical gambit from their kind. A silent challenge he is more than ready to meet with overwhelming force. He prides himself on his ability to read people, especially those he perceives as attempting to subvert authority. And in Elias, he sees a dangerous blend of arrogance and calculated defiance. The chief's internal monologue churns with a potent mix of professional duty and deeply ingrained prejudice. He thinks of countless similar encounters, each one reinforcing his conviction that certain demographics are inherently more prone to dishonesty, more inclined to test the boundaries of law and order. This young man, with his expensive suit and unnerving calm, represents a particularly galling archetype. The seemingly respectable individual who believes his perceived status grants him immunity from the rules that apply to everyone else. Thorne's boots click sharply on the tiled floor of the narrow corridor, a stark contrast to the linoleum of the lobby. The air here is colder, tinged with the metallic tang of old pipes and the faint, acrid scent of cleaning chemicals, far removed from the stale coffee and human effluvium of the main public space. He pulls Elias with a deliberate, almost exaggerated force, ensuring that the younger man stumbles slightly, a minor physical assertion of dominance that Thorne relishes. He imagines Elias's internal frustration, the seething resentment he believes must be simmering beneath that placid exterior. They always think they're smarter than us, Thorne muses, a sneer twisting his lips imperceptibly. Always trying to pull a fast one, a little badge, a fancy suit, means nothing when you're caught red-handed. He envisions the headline, "Chief Thorne nabs impersonator at courthouse." It offers a comforting narrative, a validation of his vigilance, his unwavering commitment to maintaining order against the insidious forces of chaos, forces he often associates with those who do not look like him, who do not share his background or his perceived values. He thinks of the district attorney, the frustrating meeting earlier, the subtle implications that Thorne's department was perhaps too heavy-handed, too quick to action. This incident, he assures himself, will prove them wrong. It will show them that his instincts are sharp, his methods effective, and that his authority is absolute. The side door clangs shut behind them, muffling the distant sounds of the lobby, enclosing them in a silence broken only by their footsteps and the rhythmic jingle of Thorne's duty belt. He navigates a labyrinthine series of dimly lit corridors, each one identical to the last, leading deeper into the administrative heart of the courthouse, away from public view. This path, a familiar route for transporting detainees, is Thorne's chosen arena for asserting his control, a place where his actions are less scrutinized, where the rules become more malleable. He thinks about the disorderly conduct charge, a convenient catch-all for situations like this. He can easily embellish the report, add resisting arrest, or failure to comply with a lawful order, especially given Elias's initial calm but unyielding demeanor. He knows the system. He knows how to make charges stick, how to write a report that paints the accused in the worst possible light, how to leverage his position and reputation against the word of a defendant, particularly one who lacks the immediate credibility Thorne possesses. He feels a surge of professional satisfaction mixed with a darker, more personal gratification. He is the guardian, the gatekeeper, and Elias Vance is merely another attempt at breaching the walls. Elias, despite the discomfort of the handcuffs digging into his wrists and the chief's aggressive tugging, maintains an almost preternatural calm. His dark eyes, though downcast for a moment as he navigates a sudden turn, hold no fear, no anger, only a profound, almost analytical observation. He registers the chief's heavy breathing, the scent of his stale cologne, the subtle tremor in his hand as he grips Elias's arm. He feels the cold, institutional air against his skin, notes the peeling paint on the walls, the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. These details, mundane to most, are absorbed by Elias with a heightened awareness, each one a piece of the unfolding tableau. His mind, far from panicking, works with a quiet, efficient precision, assessing the situation, cataloging Chief Thorne's actions, and anticipating his next moves. He has prepared for this. Not for this exact scenario, perhaps, but for the inherent biases and abuses of power that often manifest in such encounters. His motivation, A deeply rooted commitment to justice and systemic reform fuels his composure. He understands that this moment, humiliating as it is merely a necessary step, a dramatic preamble to a much larger, more significant confrontation. He recalls countless hours of study, of legal precedents, of observing the very systemic flaws he is now experiencing firsthand. He thinks of the mentors who had warned him, not with cynicism, but with a quiet resolve, about the deeply entrenched resistance he would face. This is it. His thoughts echo, a quiet affirmation. This is exactly what they described. He considers the silver badge, still lying on the security table, a silent witness to Thorne's rash judgment. Its significance, its true weight, is yet to be revealed, and Elias understands that its eventual revelation will be far more impactful because of this deliberate public humiliation. They reach a small, windowless room, its walls a dull gray, furnished with only a bolted-down metal table and 2 chairs. A single, bare bulb hangs from the ceiling, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows. The air here is even heavier, stagnant, carrying the faint metallic scent of old blood and despair. Chief Thorne shoves Elias towards one of the chairs, the force sending a jarring jolt through Elias's handcuffed wrists. He expects a stumble, a protest, a sign of weakness, but Elias, with a subtle shift of his weight and a quick, almost imperceptible adjustment of his stance, manages to absorb the impact, settling into the chair with an unnerving grace. His eyes, now level with Thorne's midsection, remain steady, betraying no agitation. This unexpected composure, this quiet refusal to react as expected, grates on Thorne's nerves. He slams the door shut, the sound echoing with a hollow thud that seems to seal them off from the rest of the world. "All right, hotshot," Thorne growls, his voice thick with contempt. "Let's cut the crap. Who are you, really? And what were you trying to pull with that fake badge?" He paces in the confined space, his large frame filling the small room, casting an intimidating shadow over Elias. He does not wait for an answer, instead continuing his tirade, his words a barrage of accusations and thinly veiled threats. He states that he has seen every trick in the book, that Elias is not special, and that attempting to impersonate a federal agent is a serious offense. He implies that Elias will face severe consequences, that his little charade has landed him in deep trouble from which his expensive suit and calm demeanor will not save him. His internal monologue is a torrent of dismissive thoughts, another one trying to play the victim, trying to claim discrimination. Not on my watch. He is convinced Elias is a con artist, perhaps a disgruntled former employee of some low-level agency, or simply a fantasist. He dismisses Elias's appearance, his race, his youth, as further evidence of his unsuitability for any position of true authority. He sees Elias as fundamentally other, an outsider, attempting to infiltrate a system Thorne views as his own, a system built by and for people like him. Elias, still seated, his hands cuffed behind his back, finally speaks, his voice remarkably even, devoid of any emotional inflection. He politely informs Chief Thorne that he is being unlawfully detained. He states calmly that he has fully complied with all security procedures, and that the chief's actions constitute an abuse of power. He does not raise his voice, does not challenge Thorne's authority with aggression, but rather with a quiet, almost academic recitation of facts. He explains that his identification is legitimate, that he holds a valid federal appointment, and that the chief's confiscation of his property and subsequent arrest are without probable cause. He then states clearly and precisely that he is invoking his right to legal counsel and that he wishes to make a phone call. His words are not a plea, but a statement of rights, delivered with an unshakable conviction. This calm, articulate pushback, so utterly unexpected, momentarily stills Chief Thorne. He stops pacing, his brow furrowing in a mixture of confusion and irritation. He had anticipated bluster, denial, perhaps even a tearful plea, but not this measured, legally informed retort. Elias's use of terms like unlawfully detained and abuse of power strikes Thorne as both audacious and strangely unsettling. He perceives it as a calculated maneuver, a sign that Elias is not merely an amateur, but someone who understands the legal landscape, perhaps even someone who is prepared for this very confrontation. The chief's initial reaction is a flash of anger, a desire to shut Elias down immediately, to remind him of who holds the power in this room. He wants to scoff, to dismiss Elias's words as legalistic nonsense, but a flicker of something else, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of unease, ripples through him. He quickly suppresses it, attributing it to Elias's slick performance, his attempt to intimidate Thorne with legal jargon. Unlawfully detained? Thorne sneers, forcing a laugh that sounds harsh and unnatural in the small room. He tells Elias that he is the one who determines what is lawful in his jurisdiction, and that Elias's attempts to lecture a chief of police on legal procedure are laughable. He reminds Elias that he is currently under arrest for disorderly conduct and failure to comply, and that he can add more charges if Elias continues to be uncooperative. He then dismisses Elias's request for legal counsel and a phone call, stating that Elias will get those rights when Thorne decides he has earned them, effectively bending the rules of standard arrest procedure, confident that in this small, unseen room, his word is absolute law. He believes Elias is attempting to assert a privilege he does not possess, that his calm demeanor is merely a front for a desperate man. He leans over the table, his face inches from Elias's, his breath hot and stale. He informs Elias, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, that he will sit there and think about his actions until Thorne decides to process him, and that any further smart remarks will only make his situation worse. He implies that Elias's life is about to become very uncomfortable, that the system Thorne commands can be a brutal and unforgiving machine for those who challenge it. Elias, however, does not flinch. His dark eyes, steady and unwavering, meet Thorne's gaze. Directly, he simply reiterates with the same calm, unhurried tone that he understands the chief's position, but that his rights are non-negotiable and that his compliance with the chief's unlawful demands does not waive them. He states that he advises the chief to review the procedural guidelines for federal detainment, a subtle, almost imperceptible hint at the federal nature of his own position, a hint that sails completely over Thorne's head, obscured by his anger and prejudice. Elias's voice, though quiet, carries an undeniable weight, a quiet authority that seems to challenge Thorne's bluster without raising its own volume. This unexpected, unwavering resolve, this calm assertion of rights in the face of Thorne's intimidation, begins to chip away at the chief's absolute confidence. He sees no fear, no break in Elias's composure, only an unyielding, almost patient determination. It is not defiance born of anger, but of deeply held conviction, and it is far more unsettling to Thorne than any outburst could be. A faint, almost imperceptible bead of perspiration forms on Thorne's upper lip, a subtle sign of the internal friction Elias's quiet resistance is creating. He is not just dealing with another street punk, he is dealing with something entirely different, something he does not fully comprehend, and that unnerves him deeply. The small room, once a bastion of Thorne's control, now feels charged with an unspoken tension, a silent battle of wills in which Elias, despite his physical restraints, seems to possess an unexpected, formidable strength. Thorne's mind races, struggling to categorize Elias, to fit him into a familiar box, but Elias refuses to be neatly filed away. He is an anomaly, a variable Thorne cannot control, and the chief's prejudice, once a source of strength, now blinds him to the true nature of the man sitting before him. The silver badge, forgotten on the lobby table, still gleams, a silent promise of the profound and irreversible shift that is now irrevocably in motion. The stagnant air in the small, windowless room seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on Chief Wallace Thorne, thickening around Elias Vance like an invisible shroud. Thorne's initial bluster, his attempt to reassert dominance after Elias's calm assertion of rights, faltered slightly, a barely perceptible crack in his otherwise impenetrable facade of authority. He had expected fear, subservience, or perhaps a desperate outburst, but Elias's unwavering gaze and measured tone, his quiet insistence on legalities, resonated with an unnerving conviction. Thorne, however, quickly suppressed this nascent unease, attributing it to Elias's supposed cunning, his slick performance. He scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound that grated against the oppressive silence. He told Elias that his legalistic pronouncements were nothing more than a pathetic attempt to intimidate a seasoned officer, and that such tactics would only serve to deepen his predicament. He leaned closer, his face contorted in a sneer, his voice dropping to a low, guttural growl thick with barely concealed contempt. He informed Elias that he had seen countless individuals like him, attempting to use their supposed intellect or perceived status to escape accountability, but that in this room, Thorne's word was law, and Elias was utterly at his mercy. "You think you're special, don't you?" Thorne hissed, his breath warm and stale against Elias's face. He straightened, his large frame casting a menacing shadow over the cuffed man. His eyes, small and piercing, raked over Elias's expensive suit, lingering on the fine fabric with a mixture of disdain and envy. He then declared, his voice rising in volume, that Elias's fancy clothes and big words meant absolutely nothing to him, implying that they were a mere costume, a pretense. He gestured dismissively with a flick of his wrist towards Elias's cuffed hands, his action a deliberate reminder of Elias's physical helplessness. He then announced, his tone dripping with thinly veiled prejudice, that he knew your kind, always quick to talk about rights, always quick to play the victim, but never quick to follow the rules. This was the egregious act, the deliberate, dehumanizing generalization, the explicit link between Elias's appearance and Thorne's preconceived notions of criminality and deceit. It was a statement designed not merely to intimidate, but to strip Elias of his dignity, to reduce him to a stereotype, to invalidate his very humanity in the eyes of his captor. Thorne's internal monologue amplified this prejudice, confirming his belief that Elias's calm was a sign of inherent duplicity, a trait he associated with Elias's racial background, reinforcing his own deeply entrenched biases. He viewed Elias's quiet strength as an affront, a challenge to the natural order as Thorne perceived it. He felt a perverse satisfaction in delivering this verbal assault, believing he was finally peeling back the layers of Elias's facade, exposing what Thorne considered to be his true, deceitful nature. With a sudden, aggressive motion, Thorne reached out and roughly seized Elias's lapels, pulling him forward until their faces were inches apart. The movement was jarring, intended to elicit a reaction, a flinch of fear or a burst of anger. But Elias remained still, his dark eyes, though now closer to Thorne's, betraying no emotion, only a quiet, unwavering intensity. Thorne then began a crude, invasive pat-down, far more aggressive and humiliating than the initial security check. His large hands moved brusquely over Elias's chest, down his sides, and around his waist, feeling for anything, any hidden item, any perceived contraband, his fingers lingering inappropriately, a deliberate violation of personal space and dignity. He even ran his hands down Elias's legs, his movements rough and disrespectful, a clear demonstration of absolute power and disregard for procedure. He ripped open the inner pockets of Elias's jacket, scattering a few business cards and a small, neatly folded handkerchief onto the floor. "See?" Thorne grunted, his voice laced with false triumph. "Nothing to hide, eh? Just a clean-cut citizen with nothing but an attitude and a fake badge." He gave Elias a final, dismissive shove back into the chair, the metal legs scraping loudly against the concrete floor. He then declared that Elias would remain in this room, in handcuffs, until Thorne decided he was ready to cooperate, implying an indefinite detention without due process. He told Elias that he could scream and shout all he wanted, but no one would hear him, no one would care, reinforcing Elias's perceived isolation and powerlessness. Yet Elias Vance's composure, remarkably, did not shatter. His dark eyes, steady and unwavering, remained fixed on Chief Thorne, not with defiance, but with a profound, almost analytical calm. The rough pat-down, the demeaning words, the blatant disregard for his rights, none of it surprised him. In fact, it confirmed his deepest, most meticulously researched convictions. The narrator reveals that Elias had anticipated this. He had spent years meticulously studying the systemic biases embedded within law enforcement, the patterns of abuse of power, the insidious ways in which prejudice manifested in everyday encounters, particularly for individuals who looked like him, who dared to challenge the established order. His quiet dignity was not a natural state born of innocence, but a carefully cultivated strategy, a shield forged from countless hours of preparation and a deep understanding of human psychology and legal procedure. He knew that any emotional outburst, any show of anger or fear, would only serve to validate Thorne's preconceptions, to provide the chief with the very justification he craved for his unlawful actions. Elias understood that Thorne was not merely seeking compliance. He was seeking confirmation of his own biases, a validation of his worldview that painted Elias as inherently deceitful and inferior. Elias's mind, far from being overwhelmed by the humiliation, functioned with crystalline clarity, processing every word, every gesture, every violation. He was not merely a victim, he was an observer, a meticulous chronicler of injustice. He had mentally checked off each transgression in a silent, methodical list. Unlawful detention, denial of right to counsel, denial of right to a phone call, lack of probable cause for arrest, excessive force during search, verbal harassment, discriminatory language, and now the implied indefinite detention. Each one was a brick in the wall he was building, a piece of evidence he was meticulously collecting. He understood that Thorne's current actions were not random acts of cruelty, but textbook examples of the very abuses Elias was committed to exposing and dismantling. His stillness was not passivity, but a profound act of strategic patience, a silent declaration that he was playing a different game, operating on a different timeline than his captor. He knew the legal codes, the federal statutes, the agency policies, not just theoretically, but with an almost visceral understanding of their practical application, and more importantly, their systemic circumvention. With a quiet, almost imperceptible intake of breath, Elias began his calculated pushback. His voice, still calm and measured, resonated with an undeniable, almost chilling authority that seemed to fill the small, oppressive room. He informed Chief Thorne that his actions constituted multiple violations of federal law and established procedure. He then began to enumerate them, his words precise and unhurried. He stated that under the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution, he possessed the right to due process, which included immediate access to legal counsel upon request, a right the chief had summarily denied. He then cited 18 U.S. Code, paragraph 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, explaining that the chief's use of force during the pat-down, the confiscation of his property, and his continued detention without probable cause directly violated this statute, which carried severe penalties for law enforcement officers. His tone was not accusatory, but rather informative, as if he were patiently explaining a complex legal concept to a particularly slow student. He continued, his gaze unwavering, stating that the chief's discriminatory remarks, linking Elias's perceived racial background to an alleged propensity for dishonesty and rule-breaking, constituted a clear violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, as well as Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance, a category that explicitly included local law enforcement agencies. He then paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the room, the silence amplifying their impact. His internal thoughts were not of triumph, but of grim determination, a recognition that this was the moment the tide began to turn. He knew Thorne would initially dismiss it, but the specificity, the federal nature of the statutes, would begin to sow seeds of doubt. Chief Thorne's face, which had been contorted in a sneer of contempt, slowly began to morph. The initial dismissal, the confident smirk, visibly faltered. A faint flicker of confusion, then a ripple of genuine unease crossed his features. His eyes, which had been fixed on Elias with an arrogant certainty, now darted around the small room, as if seeking an escape from the unexpected legal barrage. He had expected bluster, threats, perhaps even a physical struggle, but not this calm, articulate recitation of federal statutes. Elias's knowledge, so precise and seemingly effortless, was profoundly unnerving. Thorne had relied on the ignorance of his detainees, on their fear, on the assumption that they would not know their rights or would be too intimidated to assert them. But Elias was different. He was speaking a language Thorne understood, the language of law, but with a fluency and authority that Thorne himself rarely encountered outside of a courtroom, and certainly not from a handcuffed detainee. A bead of perspiration, more prominent now, trickled down Thorne's temple. His jaw, which had been set in a rigid line of defiance, now seemed to sag almost imperceptibly. He felt a prickle of something he rarely experienced: doubt. He had made assumptions based on Elias's appearance, his perceived age, his initial quietness. He had dismissed the silver badge as a trinket, a fake. But Elias's words, particularly the references to federal codes and civil rights acts, began to chip away at Thorne's absolute certainty. He vaguely recalled some internal training, some mandatory seminars on civil rights and constitutional law, but the details were hazy, dismissed as bureaucratic nonsense at the time. He had always believed his local authority superseded such abstract federal mandates, especially in his own precinct, but Elias's calm confidence, his lack of fear, now suggested otherwise. What are you talking about?" Thorne stammered, his voice losing some of its earlier booming resonance, replaced by a slightly higher, more uncertain pitch. He tried to regain his composure, to reassert his authority, but the words felt hollow, lacking their usual conviction. He told Elias that he was spouting nonsense, that he was trying to confuse him with legal mumbo-jumbo, but his eyes betrayed his growing apprehension. He found himself inexplicably recalling the design of the silver badge, its subtle differences from standard IDs. He remembered the feeling of unease he had suppressed earlier, the fleeting thought that Elias's stillness was more unsettling than any outburst. That unease now returned with a vengeance, blossoming into a cold, creeping dread. Elias's composure was no longer a sign of insolence. It was a sign of profound, dangerous knowledge. Thorne realized, with a sickening lurch in his stomach, that he might have made a grave mistake, a mistake far beyond a mere procedural oversight. He had acted on impulse, on prejudice, and Elias Vance, with his quiet, strategic precision, was now meticulously dismantling his authority, brick by brick, in the suffocating silence of that small gray room. The chief's arrogance was beginning to crack, revealing a raw, vulnerable fear of consequences he had never truly believed would apply to him. He stared at Elias, a man he had just humiliated, verbally abused, and unlawfully detained. And for the first time, Thorne saw not a subordinate other, but an opponent, an adversary whose true power was only just beginning to reveal itself. The air in the room, once heavy with Thorne's dominance, now felt charged with a different kind of energy, a quiet, inexorable shift of momentum, a prelude to the profound reversal that was now, undeniably, underway. The suffocating silence in the small gray room, already thick with the weight of Chief Wallace Thorne's arrogance, now began to crack, splintering under the precise, unhurried cadence of Elias Vance's voice. Thorne's initial stammered dismissal, his attempt to regain control by declaring Elias's words legal mumbo-jumbo, dissolved into a palpable unease. Elias, still seated, his cuffed wrists behind his back, continued his meticulous enumeration of Thorne's transgressions, each word a carefully placed stone in a rapidly building edifice of accountability. He explained, with the calm clarity of a seasoned lecturer, that beyond the 5th and 14th Amendments, the chief's actions constituted a direct violation of 42 U.S. Code, prior of 1983, which explicitly allows individuals to sue state and local government officials who violate their federally protected rights. He elaborated that such violations, particularly when committed under color of law, as Thorne's clearly were, could lead not only to civil penalties but also to criminal prosecution, with potential consequences including significant fines and lengthy prison sentences for the offending officer. Elias's tone remained devoid of malice or triumph, carrying instead the detached precision of a surgeon diagnosing a terminal illness. He was not merely accusing, He was dissecting, laying bare the skeletal framework of Thorne's legal vulnerability. Thorne's face, a moment ago contorted in a sneer, now visibly paled beneath his tanned skin. A cold, clammy sweat bloomed on his forehead, trickling down towards his bushy eyebrows. His eyes, small and piercing, darted frantically between Elias's unblinking gaze and the drab, unyielding walls of the room. As if seeking an escape from the suffocating legal net Elias was so calmly weaving around him, he felt a sickening lurch in his stomach, a visceral dread that pulsed through his veins. This was not the bluster of a common criminal, nor the desperate plea of a frightened suspect. This was a man speaking with an intimate, authoritative knowledge of the very laws Thorne was sworn to uphold, and more terrifyingly, the laws designed to punish those who abused their authority. The chief's mind, accustomed to simple black and white interpretations of justice, struggled to process the intricate legal web Elias was so effortlessly spinning. He found himself recalling fragmented pieces of mandatory federal training, the dry, tedious lectures he had dismissed as irrelevant bureaucratic exercises. Now, those abstract concepts were manifesting in the form of a calm, cuffed man who seemed to hold his entire career in his quiet, analytical gaze. Elias continued, his voice maintaining its steady rhythm, now shifting his focus to procedural irregularities. He pointed out that the chief had failed to rid him his Miranda rights upon arrest, a fundamental procedural safeguard. He noted that the initial disorderly conduct charge was baseless, lacking any observable behavior that could reasonably be construed as such, especially given Elias's unwavering composure throughout the entire encounter. He highlighted the chief's unilateral dismissal of the security officers, effectively taking over a federal checkpoint without proper jurisdiction or justification. He then meticulously detailed the improper search, emphasizing the excessive force and lack of probable cause, transforming what should have been a routine security check into an illegal body search. Elias's words painted a damning picture, not of a minor oversight, but of a cascading series of deliberate violations, each one compounding the chief's culpability. He calmly stated that the chief's actions had compromised any potential evidence, including the very badge Thorne had confiscated, rendering it inadmissible due to a tainted chain of custody and an illegal search. The badge, Elias explained, was not merely a trinket but federal property, and its confiscation and subsequent abandonment on the security table constituted a further violation, potentially of federal property laws. Thorne's breathing grew shallow and ragged. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly in his thick neck. His hands, which had been clenched into fists at his sides, now trembled slightly. He wanted to shout, to dismiss Elias, to reassert his power, but the words caught in his throat, replaced by a dry, metallic taste. The small room, once a symbol of his control, now felt like a suffocating cage, each of Elias's calm pronouncements a tightening of the bars. He could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet, the very foundation of his authority crumbling with each precise legal citation. He thought of his pension, his reputation, the years he had spent building his career, all suddenly hanging by a thread, threatened by this unassuming young man he had so carelessly dismissed. The insidious prejudice that had fueled his initial actions now curdled into a bitter, self-defeating regret. He had been so sure, so absolutely certain, that he was dealing with a common imposter, another one of them trying to manipulate the system. But Elias Vance was not manipulating the system. He was demonstrating a mastery of it, a profound understanding that far surpassed Thorne's own. You're just trying to confuse me," Thorne stammered, his voice hoarse, a stark contrast to his earlier booming declarations. He took a hesitant step back, his eyes still darting, unable to meet Elias's steady gaze for more than a fleeting second. He tried to project an air of authority, folding his arms across his chest, but the gesture felt weak, defensive. He cleared his throat, attempting to find his voice, to conjure the usual bravado, but it was gone, replaced by a gnawing fear. He told Elias that he was making wild accusations, that he had witnesses, referring vaguely to the security officers, but even as he spoke, he remembered dismissing them, sending them away. He had deliberately ensured there were no witnesses to his more egregious actions, a calculated move that now backfired spectacularly, leaving him isolated and exposed. Elias, observing Thorne's unraveling with a quiet, almost detached curiosity, allowed a faint, almost imperceptible curve to form at the corner of his lips. It was not a smile of mockery, but of profound understanding, of a battle long anticipated and now meticulously engaged. He then delivered the final crushing blow, the piece of information that would irrevocably shatter Thorne's remaining composure. He stated, his voice dropping slightly, imbued with a quiet, undeniable gravitas, that the silver badge, the one Thorne had so contemptuously dismissed, was not merely an identification, but a symbol of his federal appointment. He revealed, still without raising his voice, that he was Elias Vance, and that he held the position of Special Counsel to the Attorney General, assigned specifically to the Department of Justice's newly formed Office of Systemic Accountability and Reform. His appointment, he explained, had been made precisely to investigate and address patterns of civil rights violations and abuses of power within federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. He then added, with a chillingly calm precision, that his presence in the courthouse that morning was not for a critical appointment in the traditional sense, but for a pre-scheduled, unannounced site visit and preliminary assessment of the very security and procedural protocols Thorne had just so spectacularly violated. His voice was a quiet hammer, relentlessly striking the final nails into Thorne's professional coffin. The revelation hit Chief Thorne like a physical blow. His jaw went slack, his eyes widening in horrified comprehension. The color drained from his face, leaving it ashen and clammy. Special Counsel to the Attorney General, the Department of Justice, Systemic Accountability and Reform. The words echoed in his mind, each one a death knell. He had not merely violated the rights of a citizen, he had assaulted, verbally abused, and unlawfully detained a high-ranking federal official, an official whose very mandate was to expose and prosecute precisely such abuses. The badge, the trinket he had scoffed at, now shimmered in his mind's eye, with a terrifying, incandescent glow, a beacon of his catastrophic error. His arrogance, his deeply ingrained prejudice, had blinded him to the obvious, leading him down a path of self-destruction. He remembered Elias's unyielding calm, his unwavering gaze, his quiet knowledge. It had not been insolence, it had been the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what was unfolding, who understood the true stakes. A profound, suffocating silence descended upon the room, broken only by Thorne's ragged gasps for air. He stumbled back, bumping into the metal table, sending a tremor through the bolted-down furniture. His legs felt like jelly, threatening to give way. His mind reeled, frantically replaying the entire encounter. His dismissive wave to the security officers, his contemptuous words, the aggressive pat-down, the discriminatory remarks, the handcuffs, the threats of indefinite detention. Each action, each word, now loomed as an undeniable, damning piece of evidence against him. He saw his career, his reputation, his entire life crumbling before his eyes, reduced to ashes by his own unchecked prejudice and abuse of power. The power dynamics in the room had not merely shifted, they had inverted completely, utterly. Elias, still cuffed, still seated, now held absolute command. He did not need to raise his voice, did not need to move. His stillness, his quiet presence, radiated an undeniable authority that dwarfed Thorne's physical bulk and official uniform. He was no longer the suspect. He was the judge, the prosecutor, the architect of Thorne's downfall. He watched Thorne's physical and emotional collapse with the same calm, analytical gaze he had maintained throughout the ordeal. His initial objective, a preliminary assessment, had now transformed into a full-scale, irrefutable case study of systemic failure, a perfect, albeit painful, illustration of the very problems his new office was designed to combat. Chief Thorne, Elias stated, his voice cutting through the thick silence now imbued with a chillingly formal tone. I believe we have sufficient evidence. My team will be arriving shortly to begin a full investigation into the procedural irregularities and civil rights violations that have occurred this morning. beginning with my unlawful detention. He then added, his dark eyes fixed on Thorne's now terrified face. I suggest you prepare a comprehensive statement detailing your actions. And Chief, I advise you to ensure that the silver badge, my official identification, is retrieved from the security table and properly secured. It will be needed as evidence. He did not ask. He instructed. He did not suggest. He directed. The shift was complete. Thorne, the once imposing chief, now stood utterly diminished, reduced to a trembling, defeated figure, awaiting the inevitable consequences of his own prejudice and hubris. The small gray room, once his arena of dominance, had become his confessional, his judgment chamber, orchestrated by the man he had so carelessly wronged. The air, once heavy with his authority, now vibrated with Elias's quiet, inexorable power, a profound and irreversible reversal of fortune that had just begun to unfold. The suffocating silence in the small gray room, once heavy with Chief Wallace Thorne's oppressive authority, now vibrated with a different kind of energy, a chilling premonition of his own undoing. Elias Vance's calm, precise declaration, revealing his true identity as a Special Counsel to the Attorney General for the Office of Systemic Accountability and Reform, had struck Thorne like a physical blow. His jaw remained slack, his eyes wide with a horrified comprehension that bordered on disbelief. The color had drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, ashen gray, and a profuse, cold sweat now plastered strands of his thinning hair to his temples. He stumbled back, his once purposeful stride reduced to a clumsy shuffle, until his back hit the cold, unyielding wall. The metal table, a symbol of his petty dominion moments before, seemed to mock him, its bolted legs immovable, unlike his own trembling limbs. He could feel the familiar weight of his duty belt, the reassuring heft of his sidearm, but they now felt alien, useless, symbols of a power that was rapidly, irrevocably slipping through his fingers. His mind, a chaotic maelstrom of fear and disbelief, frantically replayed Elias's words, each title, each federal code, each mention of systemic accountability, a hammer blow against the edifice of his career, his reputation, his very identity. The arrogance that had blinded him, the prejudice that had fueled his actions, now curdled into a bitter, self-defeating shame. He had not merely made a mistake. He had orchestrated his own professional demise with a meticulousness that Elias himself might have envied. Elias, still seated, his cuffed hands behind his back, observed Thorne's unraveling with a detached, almost clinical gaze. His dark eyes, which had held a spark of unreadable patience, now seemed to deepen, reflecting a quiet, profound understanding of the moment. He felt no triumph, no personal vindication, only a grim satisfaction that the system, however slowly and painfully, was beginning to correct itself. His stillness was not inaction, but a deliberate, strategic pause, allowing the full weight of his revelation to settle upon Chief Thorne. Elias knew that the chief's immediate terror was a necessary precursor to the larger institutional response that was now inevitable. He had always understood that true reform began not with abstract policy, but with the stark, undeniable exposure of individual abuses, and Thorne, in his hubris, had provided a textbook example. Elias's mind, a prodigious instrument honed by years of intense legal study and an almost intuitive grasp of human nature, was already mapping out the next steps, the comprehensive investigation that would follow, the broader implications for the department and the city. He possessed a unique ability to see beyond the immediate confrontation, to grasp the intricate connections between individual actions and systemic failures, a quality that made him singularly suited for his challenging federal role. Chief Thorne, Elias stated again, his voice cutting through the thick, oppressive silence, now imbued with a chillingly formal tone that left no room for doubt or defiance. I believe we have sufficient evidence. My team will be arriving shortly to begin a full investigation into the procedural irregularities and civil rights violations that have occurred this morning, beginning with my unlawful detention. He then added, his dark eyes fixed on Thorne's now terrified face, I suggest you prepare a comprehensive statement detailing your actions. And Chief, I advise you to ensure that the silver badge, My official identification is retrieved from the security table and properly secured. It will be needed as evidence. He did not ask, he instructed. He did not suggest, he directed. The shift was complete. Thorne, the once imposing chief, now stood utterly diminished, reduced to a trembling, defeated figure, awaiting the inevitable consequences of his own prejudice and hubris. He opened his mouth, a guttural sound escaping, a desperate attempt to formulate a plea, an explanation, anything to stem the tide of his impending ruin, but no coherent words formed. His tongue felt thick, his throat constricted by a sudden, overwhelming wave of nausea. He merely nodded, a small involuntary movement, his gaze fixed on Elias as if transfixed by a cobra. At that very moment, a distant, muffled clamor began to penetrate the thick walls of the small room, the distinct, urgent wail of sirens growing steadily louder, closer. It was not the familiar local police siren, but a higher-pitched, more insistent federal wail, instantly recognizable to anyone within law enforcement. Thorne's head snapped towards the door, his eyes wide with a fresh surge of terror. He knew what that sound meant. He knew who was coming. Elias, hearing the approaching sirens, simply maintained his steady gaze on Thorne, a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt of his head indicating his awareness, his anticipation. He had not merely been waiting, he had been orchestrating. The distant sirens abruptly ceased, replaced by the heavy thud of multiple footsteps echoing through the courthouse corridors, growing rapidly louder, more purposeful. Then, the side door, the one Thorne had slammed shut with such defiant finality, burst open. Two figures, their faces grim and unyielding, stood silhouetted against the dim corridor light. They were clad in dark, impeccably tailored suits, their postures exuding an almost palpable aura of quiet authority. The first, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun, carried a slim government-issue briefcase. The second, a man, whose broad shoulders and piercing gaze commanded immediate respect, held a secure, encrypted tablet. Behind them, a phalanx of similarly dressed individuals, moving with practiced efficiency, began to fan out into the lobby, their movements swift and silent, like a well-oiled machine. These were not local law enforcement. Their bearing, their specialized equipment, their sheer numbers, bespoke a different, higher echelon of power. They were federal marshals, accompanied by a rapid response team from the Department of Justice's Internal Investigations Unit, dispatched directly from Washington, D.C., at the Attorney General's personal directive. The woman in the lead, her voice calm but imbued with an undeniable steel, spoke directly to Thorne, bypassing Elias entirely, a deliberate act that further stripped Thorne of his remaining dignity. She identified herself as Deputy Assistant Attorney General Eleanor Vance, head of the DOJ's newly established Office of Systemic Accountability and Reform, and the man beside her as Chief Inspector David Chen, lead investigator for the Public Integrity Section. The Chief Inspector's eyes immediately swept over the scene, registering Elias still in handcuffs, Thorne's ashen face, and the overall disarray. He then noticed the silver badge glinting innocently on the security table in the lobby, having been spotted by an advanced team member. A silent, knowing glance passed between Eleanor Vance and Elias, a confirmation of their shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of the precise, painful unfolding of their strategic plan. Deputy Assistant Attorney General Vance then addressed Thorne, her voice cold and devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to his own earlier bluster. She informed him that he was relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending a full federal investigation into multiple serious allegations, including but not limited to unlawful detention, abuse of authority, civil rights violations, and obstruction of a federal investigation. She then instructed Thorne, in a tone that brooked no argument, to surrender his weapon, badge, and all departmental identification. Thorne, his hands trembling uncontrollably, fumbled for his sidearm, his movements clumsy and pathetic. He unclipped his badge from his belt, its once gleaming surface now seeming dull and tarnished in his shaking hand. As he surrendered them, his eyes darted desperately towards the security officers who had been present earlier, who now stood frozen, wide-eyed, observing the scene with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. They had seen Thorne's arrogance, but never before had they witnessed such a swift, absolute collapse of his authority. Chief Inspector Chen, without a word, approached Elias. He knelt briefly, a gesture of profound respect, and with practiced ease, unlocked the handcuffs from Elias's wrists. The metallic click of the cuffs releasing echoed loudly in the suddenly hushed lobby, a definitive punctuation mark. To Thorne's humiliation, Elias rubbed his wrists briefly, the red marks from the tight cuffs standing out against his deep skin, a silent testament to Thorne's earlier brutality. He then rose, his posture effortlessly regaining its quiet dignity, his eyes meeting Eleanor Vance's in a shared, unspoken understanding. He was not merely special counsel. He was the son of Deputy Assistant Attorney General Eleanor Vance, a fact that added another layer of devastating irony to Thorne's discriminatory actions. His legal prodigy status was not just academic. It was inherited, honed, and now deployed with devastating precision. His mother, a formidable legal mind in her own right, had personally overseen his appointment to the new office, recognizing his unique blend of intellectual brilliance, unwavering composure, and profound commitment to justice as the perfect combination to tackle the entrenched issues of systemic bias. Eleanor Vance then turned her attention back to Thorne, her expression hardening. She informed him that his actions constituted a direct assault on the integrity of the Justice Department's highest priority initiative, and that the investigation would be swift, thorough, and uncompromising. She stated that the Attorney General herself had been personally apprised of the situation and had authorized a full federal takeover of the investigation, bypassing local jurisdiction entirely. She added that the evidence, including the security footage from the lobby, Thorne's own recorded statements, and Elias's meticulously documented account, would be presented to a federal grand jury within 24 hours. Her words were not threats. They were pronouncements of an undeniable, irreversible reality. Thorne slumped against the wall, his bravado utterly evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal fear. He stammered, attempting to apologize, to explain, to beg for leniency, his voice a pathetic whimper. He tried to claim a misunderstanding, to blame Elias for not revealing his identity sooner, but his words were cut short by Chief Inspector Chen, who placed a firm, unyielding hand on Thorne's shoulder. "Chief Thorne," Chen stated, his voice low and firm, "you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." The familiar Miranda warning, uttered by a federal officer in the very courthouse Thorne was supposed to command, was the ultimate humiliation, a final, crushing blow. Two federal marshals, moving with quiet efficiency, stepped forward. One secured Thorne's hands behind his back, the cold steel of the handcuffs clicking shut, mirroring the very sound that had marked Elias's unjust detention moments earlier. The other retrieved Thorne's confiscated weapon and badge, placing them into an evidence bag. Thorne's uniform, once a symbol of his formidable power, now seemed to hang loosely on his defeated frame, a costume for a fallen king. As he was led away, his head bowed in utter disgrace, his eyes caught Elias's. Elias offered no triumphant smile, no sign of personal victory, only a steady, unwavering gaze that seemed to say, "This is what accountability looks like." The federal team immediately began to secure the scene, cordoning off the security checkpoint, interviewing the bewildered security officers, and meticulously documenting every detail. Elias, now free, walked over to the security table, retrieving his silver badge. He held it for a moment, its polished surface reflecting the indifferent overhead lights, a silent witness to the profound reversal of power. He then tucked it back into his inner jacket pocket, a symbol of his mission, now undeniably accelerated and amplified by Thorne's egregious errors. He turned to his mother, Deputy Assistant Attorney General Vance, a quiet nod passing between them. The true work, the systemic reform, was only just beginning, and this public, undeniable display of justice was merely the first, albeit potent, step in a long, arduous journey. The courthouse lobby, once a stage for Thorne's unchecked authority, was now a stark tableau of his irreversible downfall, a powerful testament to the quiet, inexorable force of true accountability. The cool, institutional air of the federal district courthouse's main lobby, once thick with the palpable tension of Chief Wallace Thorne's unchecked authority, now hums with a different kind of energy, a quiet, almost reverent hum of efficiency and profound change. Elias Vance, his wrists now free from the biting cold of the handcuffs, gently rubs the faint red marks left by the metal, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture that signifies not pain, but a quiet acknowledgement of the ordeal. His dark eyes, which had held an unwavering, almost preternatural calm throughout his unlawful detention, now survey the scene with a quiet intensity, absorbing every detail of the federal team's swift, precise movements. He feels a profound sense of vindication, not as a personal triumph over Thorne, but as a validation of his life's work, a powerful affirmation of the principles he stands for. The weight of the world, a burden of systemic injustice he has carried for so long, seems to lift slightly from his broad shoulders, replaced by a renewed, invigorated sense of purpose. He registers the subtle shift in the gazes of the bewildered security officers, their initial shock giving way to a dawning respect, a recognition of his true authority. The few remaining members of the public, who had instinctively recoiled from Thorne's aggression, now watch Elias with a mixture of awe and relief, their silent presence a testament to the public spectacle of justice unfolding before their eyes. Chief Thorne, his once imposing frame now utterly diminished, stumbles slightly as the two federal marshals guide him through the lobby, his hands secured behind his back by the very handcuffs he had so readily snapped onto Elias moments earlier. His crisp, dark blue uniform, once a symbol of unyielding power, now seems to hang loosely on his defeated form, a costume for a fallen king. His face, still ashen and clammy, is a mask of utter despair and disbelief, his eyes darting frantically, unable to meet the gazes of his former subordinates or the public he had so contemptuously dismissed. The metallic click of his own handcuffs, mirroring the sound that had sealed Elias's unjust fate, reverberates through the space, a definitive, humiliating punctuation mark to his downfall. He attempts to mumble something, a desperate, guttural sound, perhaps a plea or an incoherent explanation, but no coherent words escape his constricted throat. His arrogance, the bedrock of his identity, has shattered, leaving him exposed and vulnerable, a stark public example of unchecked power meeting its inevitable, crushing consequence. The marshals escort him towards a waiting, unmarked federal vehicle outside, sealing his fate away from the public eye, but his disgrace remains etched into the very fabric of the courthouse lobby, a chilling lesson for all who witnessed his spectacular fall. He is not merely arrested, he is profoundly, irrevocably disgraced, his career, his reputation, and his entire legacy crumbling into dust. Deputy Assistant Attorney General Eleanor Vance, Elias's mother, approaches him, her intelligent eyes reflecting a complex blend of professional satisfaction and maternal pride. She places a hand on his shoulder, a brief, firm squeeze that conveys a lifetime of shared understanding and unwavering support. She informs him, her voice low and precise, that the Attorney General has been immediately briefed and is personally directing the full scope of the federal investigation. She states that the evidence collected, including the security footage meticulously preserved by an advanced federal team, Thorne's own recorded statements from the small room, and Elias's comprehensive, real-time account, forms an irrefutable case. She also mentions that the security officers present during the initial incident are providing detailed statements, confirming Thorne's aggressive and discriminatory behavior. She assures Elias that the charges against Thorne will be comprehensive, extending beyond unlawful detention to include civil rights violations under color of law, obstruction of justice, and potentially official misconduct, ensuring a robust federal prosecution. Elias nods, his expression one of quiet resolve, confirming his readiness to provide whatever further information is needed, his focus already shifting from the immediate triumph to the arduous work that lies ahead. The long-term impact of this singular, high-profile incident begins to ripple outward almost immediately, a seismic shift in the landscape of law enforcement accountability. Within hours, the Department of Justice issues an unprecedented public statement announcing the immediate federal takeover of the investigation into Chief Wallace Thorne and the entire local police department, citing grave concerns about systemic civil rights abuses and a culture of unchecked authority. This announcement sends shockwaves through local and state agencies nationwide, serving as a stark warning. The Office of Systemic Accountability and Reform, Elias's newly established division, suddenly finds its mandate amplified, its budget expanded, and its authority cemented as a critical instrument of federal oversight. This incident, initially a routine site visit, transforms into a foundational case study, a powerful precedent for the office's future interventions. A sweeping multi-agency investigation is launched into the city's police department, spearheaded by Elias Vance and Chief Inspector David Chen. They meticulously review years of internal affairs complaints, use-of-force reports, and arrest data, uncovering a disturbing pattern of racial profiling, excessive force, and discriminatory practices that had long been dismissed or covered up. The security camera footage from the courthouse lobby, a silent, damning witness to Thorne's unbridled prejudice, becomes a centerpiece of federal training programs, starkly illustrating the dangers of unchecked bias in law enforcement. New federal policies are swiftly drafted and implemented, mandating more rigorous and frequent civil rights training for all state and local law enforcement agencies receiving federal funding, with clear, enforceable accountability measures. These policies include explicit guidelines on de-escalation techniques, implicit bias recognition, and stricter protocols for the handling of federal officials, particularly those involved in oversight roles. The training programs emphasize the constitutional rights of all citizens, regardless of perceived status or appearance, and underscore the severe penalties for officers who violate those rights. Furthermore, the incident prompts a national conversation about the need for independent oversight bodies and robust mechanisms for civilian review of police conduct. Elias's office begins to develop model policies for community engagement and transparency, advocating for the public release of police data, the establishment of accessible complaint systems, and the creation of community advisory boards to foster trust and collaboration between law enforcement and the communities they serve. The case also highlights the critical importance of diverse representation within law enforcement, from patrol officers to high-ranking federal officials, recognizing that varied perspectives are essential for fostering equitable and just policing practices. The Attorney General herself, deeply moved by Elias's account and the blatant display of prejudice, champions legislation aimed at strengthening federal powers to intervene in cases of systemic police misconduct, ensuring that no local jurisdiction can operate outside the bounds of constitutional law. The local police department, under intense federal scrutiny, undergoes a complete overhaul. Chief Thorne is formally charged with multiple felonies, facing a lengthy prison sentence, his pension stripped, and his name permanently synonymous with corruption and abuse of power. His trial becomes a national spectacle, a powerful demonstration that even the highest-ranking officials are not above the law. Other officers implicated in the systemic abuses are also investigated, leading to suspensions, dismissals, and further arrests, sending a clear message that such behavior will no longer be tolerated. The department's leadership is replaced, and a new chief, committed to reform and community-oriented policing, is appointed, working closely with Elias's office to rebuild public trust. The city itself faces significant civil lawsuits, leading to substantial financial settlements. For victims of police misconduct, a further testament to the cost of unchecked authority. In the aftermath, Elias Vance emerges not as a mere legal professional, but as a quiet, powerful symbol of a new era of accountability and justice. His story, widely publicized, resonates deeply with communities across the nation, particularly those who have long endured similar forms of discrimination and abuse. He becomes a beacon of hope, demonstrating that systemic change is not merely an idealistic dream, but an achievable reality when individuals with integrity and courage are willing to stand up even in the face of overwhelming odds. He continues his work at the Office of Systemic Accountability and Reform, traveling across the country, conducting investigations, advising on policy, and inspiring a new generation of legal professionals and community activists. His quiet strength, his unwavering composure, and his profound commitment to justice become his most potent weapons in the ongoing fight for a more equitable society. The events of that morning in the courthouse lobby, initially a moment of profound humiliation for Elias, transform into a pivotal turning point, a powerful catalyst for enduring positive change. They serve as a resounding declaration that justice, though sometimes slow and arduous, possesses an inexorable force that ultimately triumphs over prejudice and abuse. They underscore the profound truth that true authority resides not in a uniform or a title, but in the unwavering adherence to principle, the courageous defense of fundamental rights, and the relentless pursuit of equality for all. The story of Elias Vance and Chief Thorne becomes a modern parable, a testament to the fact that when individuals choose to stand firm against injustice, when they assert their inherent dignity and demand accountability, even the most deeply entrenched systems of power can be compelled to bend, to break, and ultimately, to transform towards a more just and inclusive future. The courthouse lobby, once a stage for a petty tyrant, now stands as a silent monument to the quiet, undeniable power of vindication, a testament to the enduring promise of a more perfect union.